In this Blender tutorial for beginners, I will show you how I made a cartoon water animation using the wave modifier. First, delete the cube and add a grid. Subdividing it by 60 on the X and the Y. I changed the point light to a sunlight, strength of 8, and no shadows. And then move it into place. I select the grid and I add a displace modifier, a new texture. Under the texture tab, I choose the clouds for the type. Back on the modifier tab, I change the strength to lessen the effect of the modifier. I now add a wave modifier. Place it above the displace modifier. And if I play the animation, you can now see a wave motion. Under the time panel, change the speed to slow the wave action. I'll also change the height to make the waves a bit gentler. I'll change the motion to Y only, so the waves only flow in one direction. I right-click on the grid, choose Shade Smooth. Now note, if you want this to look pixelated, do not shade the grid smooth. Now it's time to add some shading to the grid. Under the shading workspace, add a new material. I add a diffuse BSDF node. This will add diffuse reflection to the grid, and I changed the color to a mid-blue using the hex code 4B678F. I add a shader to RGB node. This will allow me to add a color ramp to the diffuse BSDF. Then I add a color ramp that will allow me to add colors to the grid. I changed the black color stop on the color ramp to a mid-blue, which is going to be the same as the BSDF color. I add a color stop in the middle and change the color to a slightly lighter blue. Use the hex code 4D869C. Add another color stop. And change it to a lighter blue. Use the hex code 6AC8DC. I changed the gradient type to cardinal. And this will affect how the gradient is added to the grid. Then I move the color stops to affect the material on the grid. To add a bit more depth to the materials, I duplicate the shader to RGB and the color ramp nodes. I delete 2 of the color stops and change it back to black and white. Add a mix RGB node. Connect the first color ramp to color 2. A second color ramp to color 1. I then connect the mix RGB to the base color of the principled shader. I change the specular to a lower number, so there isn't quite so much sheen on the water surface. If I want a darker material, I can lower the factor of the mix RGB node. Now if I move the light around, I can see how it affects the material. To render this animation, under the Output Properties tab, I choose where I want to save the animation. I use the FFmpeg file format with QuickTime for my encoder. Under the Render Properties tab, the Film section, I choose Transparent. I open up the Properties panel, and under View, choose Lock Camera to View, and then set up my camera. Then save the blend file, and choose Render Animation under the Render menu. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this useful. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and turn on the notifications. Have a good day.